and I am honored to be here tonight on behalf of myself and on behalf of the over 30,000 other people who are living, dreaming, and breathing with cystic fibrosis every single day. And let me be honest and just say that when my dear friend and CF superwoman over there, Catherine Hopkins, asked me if I could come here this evening to speak with you all, I kind of thought that it would be a walk in the park. After all, after 30, and it's almost 31 now, years of living with cystic fibrosis, I reasoned that that was long enough for almost anyone to have learned a few facts and be able to speak to an audience. I could tell you, for example, that cystic fibrosis is a genetic recessive disorder, one of the most common fatal diseases in the United States. I could tell you that it causes thick, sticky mucus to build up in the respiratory system, and that it leads to frequent infections. I can tell you how most people with cystic fibrosis are diagnosed pretty early in life, almost 70% of us before age 3, and how that one simple diagnosis often means a lifetime of pills, medicines, therapies, hospitalizations, IVs, and, with all due respect to Dr. Schmidt, sometimes seemingly endless doctor's visits. I could tell you how, despite all of the advances, the current median life expectancy for CF patients stands at about 37 years old. I could tell you about how that number is simply not good enough. But then I realized that all of those things are just numbers, statistics, and facts. To stand up here and tell you all of that would be like asking one of those runners out there in the lobby to come in right now and tell you that they ran 26.2 miles today and it was 71 degrees and they felt a little tired. It might be true, and those might all be true facts, but it would hardly be the whole story. So instead of focusing on the mile markers of our race against cystic fibrosis tonight, I've decided instead, if you'll all indulge me, to tell you a story. And it's a story about what it feels like to run. When I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the age of just 6 weeks old, way back in 1981, the race for a cure for CF was, to put it mildly, a marathon. At that time, there were exactly 0 drugs that were FDA approved specifically for cystic fibrosis treatment, and the life expectancy for a child born with CF was just about 18 years. My doctor's words as he handed me back to my shell-shocked parents were simply, "She has a very hard road, Mike and Kathleen. Just take her home and love her for as long as you have her." CF back then meant chronic infections with frequent hospitalizations and hours of manual therapy just to make it through to the next bend in the road. It seemed, at that time, like it was enough just to try and keep up with CF so that it didn't get too far ahead of us. To outrun this disease seemed like a very distant dream. Luckily, like most of the people that work with CF, my parents are dreamers. When they took me home after that initial diagnosis, they made their decision to take their daughter and hit the ground running. And even better yet, they knew that the best races are often won in teams, especially when you have teammates like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And so, as I began to grow up with cystic fibrosis, our marathon turned from an impossible race into a very exciting relay. When I was 8, the CFF helped discover the gene behind cystic fibrosis and the over 1,500 different mutations to that gene that can cause the disease. When I was 12, the first CF-specific drug therapies were approved, again, because of the persistent efforts of the CFF and the dollars raised through relatively small events, just like this evening's. And every single milestone reached meant that I and my friends could have one more chance at the finish line. By the time I headed off to college and then moved to New York City for law school, the life expectancy had increased from just 18 into the early 30s, and there were new drugs in the pipeline, and I was keenly aware that through the help of my fellow runners, I had most definitely proven my doctor wrong. CF patients like to do that. Our team was running along full tilt, and it would have all been perfect if only my lungs had been able to keep the pace. I was just 26 years old when my doctor sat me down and told me that all of the advancements being made just weren't quite coming fast enough for me. Despite all of our progress, my lungs were failing because of cystic fibrosis, and I was in need of a double lung transplant. I was actively listed for transplant in 2009, and I waited almost 10 months until June of 2010 for the call that eventually saved my life. Again. During that time, I was in very close contact with a friend and a fellow CF runner named Emily Schaller. Some of you might know her. She's actually in DC tonight speaking at their gala and helping us raise a lot more money for CF. But at the time, she was on a trial for a new drug called Vertex 770. The drug was working wonders on her lungs while I waited for my new pair. Sometimes we would sit up late at night talking on the phone. Her in Detroit, me in New York, me anxious about a transplant to save my life, and her worried about how fast we could get approval for the drug that could save hers. Race you to the finish, we would joke. I still remember waking up from the transplant and receiving a text from Emily, literally not 2 days later. I was still in the ICU. And it read, "Congratulations, you won." I texted her back the sentence, "Yeah, but we're not done yet." And that, folks, is the message that I want to share with you tonight. Because 31 years after my initial diagnosis, and 2.5 years after my transplant, the race to cure cystic fibrosis has become nothing short of a dead sprint to the finish. Just this past January, as you've already heard, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation scored the approval of Emily's miracle drug, that one called Kalydeco, and it was the first ever drug to target the underlying defect that causes cystic fibrosis. In the months since that announcement, we have continued running stronger than ever with studies to examine the possible effects of Kalydeco and other drugs of its kind on more patients with more mutations, including the most common CF mutation, affecting about 85% of our population. And less than 1 month ago, I sat down with Dr. Bob Beth, the CEO of the foundation, in New York City, and I asked him what all of this meant. He said that it meant, quite simply, that we would not stop until there was a drug, a treatment, and ultimately a cure for every single patient with cystic fibrosis. Which makes sense, right? Because that's what teammates do. We help each other across the finish line. We are closer than ever. And for the first time, I can stand up here and I can tell you honestly that children born today with cystic fibrosis are going to have a normal lifespan. Think about how far we've come. This afternoon, I was actually stopped in the lobby by 3 women who were all wearing medals, and they asked if I would take a picture of their triumphant team in the stairwell that's right outside this ballroom as they posed after the marathon. After I snapped their smiling photo, one of them asked me if I were here to watch the runners. No, I said, I didn't come here to watch. I am most definitely here tonight to run. And I want to be the first to tell you that I am very proud to be running with all of you. And congratulations for joining what is sure